Everyone, Oli here, and this is my review of The Ice Warriors, the third story of the fifth season of classic Doctor Who, starring Patrick Troughton as the second Doctor. The Ice Warriors is the 39th story overall, it's 6 episodes long, and it's written by Brian Hills. Of all 6 episodes, only episodes 2 and 3 are missing, and fortunately, they received the animated reconstruction for the DVD release in 2013. And speaking of missing stories, after the Ice Warriors, we only get like 5 missing stories left, and due to the fact that due to the fact that a large chunk of season 6 actually survives. So the plot of the story is as follows: in the distant future, Earth faces a new ice age. While a dedicated team of scientists battle to hold the approaching glaciers at bay, a startling discovery is made deep within the ice: an alien warrior, frozen for a millennia. When the Doctor, Jamie, and Victoria arrive, they soon discover Earth is under threat from the Ice Warriors, fearsome Martians intent on conquering our planet for themselves. So that's the plot of the Ice Warriors. So, the story itself, in my opinion, has a decent plot, but once again, the story length, in addition to the other factors, is what really brings the story down, in my opinion. Aside from the story's length, I like the production that went behind it. I think this is probably one of the better productions for this season. I like the Britannica's base and the snowy surroundings around it, and the ghastly music of this story. I also liked as well, especially the title cards after the title sequence played, and it definitely felt atmospheric. The story was directed by Derek Martinus. He did an okay job. He actually said that the Ice Stories is his favorite story, but in my opinion, I think he could have done a better job directing the story. Yeah, he does do a good job. I think some parts could have actually been better, in my opinion. So, as I mentioned, the plot was quite decent. The whole new Ice Age thing was pretty cool, and this story had some pretty good conflicts as well, especially between Clint, the leader of the Britannica space, and Penley, the main scientist guys, but he decided to leave to live amongst the mountains or something because he was fed up with with Clint's decisions and basing his decisions on what the computer actually says. And of course other conflicts as well, such as the whole science versus nature, the whole and man versus machine, and the whole science versus logical thinking as well. It does turn with Clint and Miss Garrett's over reliance on the computer, and even the doctor was actually right saying he doesn't really trust the computers because they often come up with inaccurate results. But I remember he actually said this when Clint was actually asking him, "Why don't you use a computer to do your own work and stuff?" And the doctor said, "No, I prefer to use my method because obviously computers they come up with very inaccurate results and stuff like that." And episode 6 actually proves that his doctor's point because when faced with the dilemma of the Ice Warriors spaceship and the Ionizer, when Clint asks the computer what to do, and the computer just completely breaks down. And the way that Miss Garrett and Clint were pretty much treating the computer as if it was a god or something was quite good, and they pretty much took what the computer was saying for gospel. Now, on to the acting. I would say that Patrick Troughton did a good performance, but obviously this isn't his best performance. But he does have some good moments. Again, one of the parts I liked was in the beginning when the TARDIS pretty much landed like face up instead of the way it usually lands, and it pretty much like slides down a bit, and and obviously the Doctor, Jamie, and Victoria like trying to like scramble up to try and at least get out of the TARDIS. And it was quite funny as well. I think the Doctor was like, "You're stepping on my hand, Jamie," and then Jamie was like, "Doctor, you're standing on my head." And Victoria somehow got out of there unscathed. And speaking of which, one of my other favorite scenes in this story as well was in episode 5 when the Doctor and Victoria were held captive by the Ice Warriors. And obviously the Doctor was explaining his plan to Victoria to escape, but obviously had to tell Victoria to like fake cry so Zondo doesn't hear what they're planning, and then and it was quite funny. It was quite funny because Victoria's over the top crying, and then because the Doctor was like, "I'm going to escape with aluminium sulfide," and then Victoria's like, isn't that a stink bomb? And then it was like, yes, and then but you can tell it was a very funny scene, and especially Victoria's over the top crying and how she was pretty much switching between her fake crying and whispering to the doctor saying, okay, what will you do? It was a very well acted scene in my opinion. So speaking of which, Jamie and Victoria, they were okay. Jamie, I feel like he barely does anything in the story. I felt like I was watching a season 4 story with him because he doesn't really. When Jamie first arrived in the TARDIS, because in his first 2 stories he didn't really do anything after joining in the Highlanders. Yes, and so basically Jamie in this story, he gets knocked out by an ice story, and then which then kidnaps Victoria, and then he goes with Arden to look for Victoria, and then they come back. Then they go out again to look for the Ice Warrior spaceship, and then one of the Ice Warriors decides to kill Arden, but then Jamie is caught in the crossfire, ends up paralyzing him temporarily, and then Penny pretty much on his way back to the Britannica space, they come across a bear. Obviously, Jamie still paralyzed. He's pretty much been dragged on the floor, and then when Jamie comes to, he just stands there. With the whole issue of the Ice Warriors and stuff like that. Victoria, yes, she does get captured by the enemy again, but she actually does make use of her surroundings and she proves to be rather resourceful, and especially the part when she screams to cause a bit of an avalanche to trap an ice warrior that was after her to in order to escape. And then obviously I liked how she was able to get the aluminium sulfide open that the doctor was trying to open, and then throws it on Zondo to incapacitate him. And so I would say Victoria, good job, girl. So the guest cast, I would say that they didn't really impress me a whole lot. Yes, they did have their good moments, but nothing too extraordinary. I mean, and I think there were times they were a bit forgettable than outside the other focused characters such as Penley, Arden, Storr, Miss Garrett. Even though Miss Garrett, she just doesn't really do a whole lot, but she does play a part in the story a little bit. For instance, I actually liked Clint. I mean, I liked how he and Miss Garrett were very reliant on the computer, and you will not hear a bad word against it. I think Miss Garrett actually shot one of the people. I think his name was Walters, because he was pretty much complaining that the computer has gotten them nowhere. We're doing nothing. We're just being told to wait, and that's not really doing us anything. And then ends up getting bumped off by Miss Wendy. Miss Garrett. I keep confusing Miss Garrett with the actor's name. But I mean, I actually liked Garrett. I mean, he was a good leader, but obviously he's a very flawed leader because he was pretty much relying on what the computer was saying, and he was basing his actions on what the computer would actually say instead of like coming up with say, okay, guys, so this is what we're going to do. So obviously the computer's not very reliable at the moment, so but instead he just decides to wait because the computer told him to wait. Penley I also liked. I mean, he was referred to Clinton. Obviously, they're pretty much opposites. Clint being the whole main tech savvy guy, and Penley was this old fashioned, ordinary thinking guy. I mean, and I liked the fact that they pretty much showed how the Britannica space was struggling with Penley's absence. So Penley's companion Storr was interesting. I mean, he was the scavenger that was living with Penley for a bit after Penley left Britannicus, and then he was a good character, but I did find him a bit annoying. I mean, but obviously, I get his motive. He was very anti-science, and I believe that the ionizer was evil because the base actually wanted to melt the ice, and obviously that would, of course, like catastrophic consequences for everyone involved. So obviously, that would probably much leave Storr without a home, and obviously that was the reason why he was pretty much against the whole ionizer and the whole scientist sort of thing. So now on to the titular Ice Warriors. This is their first appearance, and when they debuted, they were rather popular in my opinion. They were rather popular. I think they even said on the DVD info leaflet, they said that they were quite popular. They even decided to bring them back in the next story, the Seeds of Death, in the next season. And obviously, Seeds of Death, a bit of a spoiler alert because I was actually thinking of waiting until I get to that review, but The Seeds of Death is actually my favorite classic Who story ever. I mean, it's actually one of my firsts, and I really love it, but I'll get to the more why I really love The Seeds of Death when I get to that review. So, and obviously after The Seeds of Death, they make two more appearances in Classic Who for the Poetry era, and both of their stories are quite linked. They were linked. That's the Monster Peladon and the Curse of Peladon, and obviously their return in the New Who for Series 7, Cold War, and Series 10, I think it's called The Empress of Mars. Yeah. Yeah, so the Ice Warriors in this story, they're well written here. They're rather menacing, very brutal, especially when they killed Arden and pretty much paralyzed Jamie. I mean, Varga, the leader, was quite good, and the other Ice Warriors, I think they had names, but I don't really think they really focused on Ice Warriors outside Varga and Zondo. I mean, to say that, I think the Ice Warriors had a very good introduction. So, in my opinion, the animation here, but I mean, it was rather decent. Obviously not the best, but I think the animators they did try their best to make it look good, considering the fact that at the time the Ice Warriors was released, we already had the invasion and the Reign of Terror, and obviously the Reign of Terror out of the three, I think I would say the Reign of Terror is actually the best animation because it was so beautifully well done. It was stunning, and obviously, honestly, if you look at it now, we have other animations such as the Macro Terror, Faceless Swans, Moonbase, Free from the Deep that's actually coming out very soon. I mean, at the time we're making this video, so obviously the Ice Warriors pretty much falls in the middle. I know some people who actually don't like the story, the animation of the story, but I think it's quite decent in my opinion. But obviously the animators actually tried to make it look identical to the telesnaps, but I feel like they're trying to base it on the telesnaps too often. So there are a lot of issues that really put me off the story, and I already mentioned most of them already, such as the episode length and other bits and bobs as well. But so one of the first other issues, so obviously the main issues they don't really. I mean, it's but when I was making my list of the pros and cons of the story, they pretty much are pretty much the same. Obviously, but the way I don't want it to like. I mean, if it's more, then I mean, if the cons are more than the pros, then it's obviously not a good story. And obviously, if and vice versa, if the pros actually outweigh the cons, then it's a really good story. But they're quite even when I made this list, and obviously, this is not really good. So, I mean, obviously, there were some good concepts such as the length of the story. Sorry, no. Obviously, such as the whole idea, such as the whole man versus machine, science versus nature concept, but ideally, I said it before and I'll say it again, the Ice Warrior should not have been 6 parts. I mean, this was too long, and obviously, episode 1 had a lot of filler, and obviously, episode 2 as well, and it really dragged. And obviously, the pacing was quite poor. And then, obviously, the combined recons on the DVD for episodes 2 and 3, which was a special feature on the DVD, but it was actually released on the VHS back in 1998. I think that was a lot better than episodes 2 and 3 on their own because it did get rid of some unneeded parts. As I mentioned before, I found Store to be rather annoying. I mean, even though I think he was killed off too soon. I think he would have at least the Ice Warriors that made them work for him. Even though I don't think he really understood some concepts, but I did think he was killed off a bit too soon. And obviously, the wonderful computer, voiced by Roy Skeleton, was alright, but without the subtitles, it was very hard to make out what it was saying, and I really didn't like that. I mean, obviously, yeah, I watched my stories to my subtitles, but even without the subtitles, even with the subtitles, just very hard what to hear what it was saying. It just, I really think it shouldn't have been done that way. And obviously, my final issue was Victoria. I love the girl, but Debbie Watling did a good job. But I did think that Victoria was a bit over hysterical at times. She was just like, "Oh, Jamie, let me go. I'm helping it," something like that. But it was a bit off. It was actually she was so hysterical. It was actually a bit off-putting, and I didn't really like the fact that she was held back captive by the Ice Warriors for so long. So to conclude, the Ice Warriors had promise, but making it 6 episodes long didn't do it justice at all. And obviously, if it was a 4-parter, it would have been a far more enjoyable story. So the Ice Warriors gets a mere 5.5 out of 10. Unfortunately, this story has the dishonor of being one of my least favorite Charlton stories. So my next review will be the 40th story overall, The Enemy of the World. So stay alert for that. Thank you for watching. Please let me know what you thought of the Ice Warriors and this review itself. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already, and like my other videos as well. So until then, see you next time.